Chocobo Racing for the PS1 is one of the coolest kart-style racing games of all time. It does need to be said that it's not really Chocobo Racing. I mean, there's one Chocobo in the game, but all the other characters are basically something Final Fantasy related. Like, you have the Mogul and you have like the little black mage that you race. You're basically racing characters that are kind of Final Fantasy related, or would be in kind of like the Final Fantasy world, or characters that have something to do with Final Fantasy, like a character whose main powers while racing is shooting like fire or like Firaga at enemies. That's actually one of the coolest things about this game. It uses cool things from the Final Fantasy games. It mixes Final Fantasy and racing flawlessly. I mean, it has music from Final Fantasy as well as its own music. It has levels that kind of look like they would be in Final Fantasy. I mean, the game's graphics are like straight out of Final Fantasy VII, and that's just fantastic. Not so much the areas that are sad or adult in nature, like Juno or Midgar, but more like the happy-go-lucky, childlike, wondrous areas of Final Fantasy VII. There are also different game modes, like different racing modes, and also there's a story mode, which basically all has to do with racing, but there's actually like this pop-up book story where it's told in a little pop-up book, and you have like this Chocobo that you start off with, and then there's Sid, and Sid makes this Chocobo some rollerblades that make the Chocobo race faster, and then the Mogul comes along, and Sid's like, hey, Mogul, Chocobo, why don't you go on an adventure to collect some, powers to help your racing? And they're like, yeah, whatever, just don't harpoon us, and they leave. And that's basically the whole game, is them just traveling around the world, racing people. The powers you have in this game is something you start off with, like, there's powers that let you steal other people's powers, there's powers that let you float above terrain that it's kind of hard to race on, but really all these powers are kind of worthless except two powers, which just make you go faster. I mean, obviously, the powers that just make you go faster for a short time are the powers you want in a racing game. I mean, if this was a fighting game, I would want the powers to make me hit harder. It's just common sense. Playing this game against other people, everybody would just be clamoring to get those powers that just make you go faster for a short while. All the other powers are more or less worthless. You also pick up powers as you race, like in a normal kart game. Like, you'll ride into these things that are just floating around on the racetracks, and those also give you powers, like the power to go faster, or the power to shoot something, like the aforementioned Firaga spell. The racing handles fantastically. I mean, it is spot on. And of course, you don't expect a kart racing game to handle like cars. I mean, it handles a lot better than cars. It's a lot easier to make sharp turns than you would in a car. But when there are some places where it's maybe a little harder to make sharp turns, what you can do is press the brake and accelerate button together, and that kind of makes you skid around the corners, which makes the game even easier to handle. Don't get me wrong though, this game is not entirely for children. It can get pretty difficult. Like in the story mode, there are some tough enemies that you have to race against. There are levels that are just objectively harder to race than others. Like, you might be racing through some kind of beautiful green field, and that's kind of fun to race, but then you race through a level that's basically surrounded by a volcano, and the twists and turns there are just impossible. You're constantly going up mountains, you're constantly falling off into lava. There is some serious gameplay in this game if you're looking for something a little tougher than just casual racing. Chocobo Racing uses just enough of cool, memorable things from the Final Fantasy world to make people who are really big fans of early Final Fantasy like myself incredibly nostalgic. And that's one of the reasons this game is good. I mean, if it wasn't Final Fantasy related, it would just be a regular run-of-the-mill, nothing special kart racing game. But because it has cool, memorable Final Fantasy things in it, that raises this game's score. The thing is, when this game first came out, it was absolutely panned by almost everyone in the reviewing community. I mean, the big thing everyone was saying is just, oh, it's just a cheap ripoff of Mario Kart. I mean, it's like saying Borderlands is just a cheap ripoff of Deus Ex. Uncharted is just a cheap ripoff of Lara Croft. I mean, if a game is good and has a cool theme, so what if it's like some other game? I mean, I'll give you this much. If you're not a fan of Final Fantasies 1 through 10, there really isn't much special in this game. For you, it would just be a run-of-the-mill kart racing game with pretty good controls, but it wouldn't be anything special. It would just be an average game. Honestly though, what kind of gamer isn't a fan of at least one early Final Fantasy game? To me, that would be just someone with weird taste. This game gets an official Stan Birdman rating of an 8 out of 10. Thanks for watching. Goodbye, my friends.